Well, as John said, our lesson of Scripture this morning comes to us from Mark's Gospel. This morning I'll be reading from chapter 1, verses 9 through 13. Hear now the reading of God's holy word. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased." And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness for 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Something happens to us that's not particularly pleasant or welcome and not understanding. Sometimes we catch ourselves saying in a bewildered kind of way, this must be some kind of test. Ever caught yourself saying that? Most of us have. If each of us were asked to name the two hardest things that have happened in life that we've had to deal with, most of us could come up with two pretty quickly. We could say what those things were that have pushed us to the limit of our ability to cope. What do you think Jesus would say to us if we could ask him that question? What are the two things that have really pushed you to the limit in life? I think he might say the 24 hours before his crucifixion and the 40 days in the wilderness at the beginning of his ministry. He was tested, tempted, if you will, at the beginning and at the end. How like life is that? Mark's account is very brief. It says that after Jesus' baptism, the Spirit spoke and said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And then Mark's account follows up with these words, "And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness where the devil was waiting for him." And how like life is that sometimes. Testing. Where does it come from? Does it come from God? Does it come from the devil? Does it come from both? Or is it sort of circumstances just coming together sometimes and our finding ourselves in the wrong place at the wrong time? If you want 10 different opinions on what testing is, you just ask 10 different Christians. Maybe what that says to us is that we're asking the wrong question in testing when we want to know why this is happening to me. Let's check in for a minute with our old friend Job. Job asked why of God time and again. He's got 3 friends, and they try to give him answers. And all of them give a little bit different answer, but all 3 of Job's friends have one common thread in their answer. And that is, they blame Job. It can't be God's fault by definition. It's got to be yours, Job. And one of them goes so far as to tell Job he's being tested and punished because of something he has done to displease God. And his friend says to him, "Job, you've done something wrong and you're just too dumb to know what it was. You know, maybe Job should find some new good friends. They go to him and they pump him up, and all full of vim and vinegar, he goes back to God and gets in God's face with a why, and tells God what his friend said. Why? If you say why enough times, why, it kind of goes right into another W word, whine. Whine. And that's sometimes, that's the effect of asking why one too many times, that we begin to feel like we're being mistreated by God, and our question turns to a complaint, and we don't even know it. Well, Job did it one time too many, and God thundered back his answer from heaven. He said, Job, the difference between you and me is that I am God and you are not. Huh? I'm infinite. You're nothing. I'm omnipotent. You know nothing. I'm eternal. You're not. You're a human being, Job. And your perspective and your comprehension is so limited that if I try to explain to you why everything is the way it is, you couldn't understand it. You just look back at me and go, huh? So, I'm not going to try. And as the echo of God's voice sort of reverberates and trails off, the implication that God leaves behind is the thought that Job should spend less time, less energy with the why, and spend more effort in handling the test, dealing with it, whatever the reason for it is. This is the thought I want to leave with you this morning. Testing is not always to be understood, by us at least. But, understand it or not, it's to be dealt with. No matter where it comes from or why it happens to us. Because in the things that test us in life, in the things that tempt us, in the things that we really would rather not have come our way, that push us, we have a way of either finding our destiny or missing it. The important thing is not why you and I seem to be tested, but it's who we become as we deal with the test. And the answer is we either move in the direction of faith or we move in the direction of unfaith and doubt. If we had to understand everything in life before we dealt with it, wouldn't get much done, would we? In the facing of a test, in the dealing with it, it just inevitably happens. We become a certain kind of person. And that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. There comes a time when the why doesn't matter so much anymore. Why is a very important question for us here on earth. And I've had, I don't know how many times I have thought to myself, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask, why this or why that? And I bet every one of you has made that same statement in your heart and in your mind. I'm going to get an answer. You know what? My hunch is, we can check this out later when we all get together, as the hymn says. But I think there's a good chance when we get to heaven, the why will not matter. Because everything will be so right and everything so in place that we won't have to know the answer to the question why, which is the question we cannot keep ourselves hardly from asking here on earth. What matters in our testing is the discovery of what we're made of. Doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the justice or the injustice of what's happening to us. But in dealing with the things that come our way, we become a certain kind of person. And we either show ourselves to be persons of faith, or we wind up feeling beaten, and behind beaten, not very far back, is bitter. It's a short walk from beaten to bitter. And we can be like a child if we want, who will throw a tantrum over something he or she wants that they're not going to get from us. But they can expend a lot of energy in that temper tantrum moment. Or we can look at the reality of something that's hard, difficult, unpleasant, and deal with the reality that life sometimes comes not only without the silver spoon, but it also comes sometimes without explanation. This is the season of Lent, when we turn our look inward. Think about our walk with Jesus. And whether it's as close as we want it to be. When we think about what Jesus did for us. Came down here. If I'd been up there, I'd have thought a long time before I came down here. If I had the perks that Jesus had. And to submit himself to this life that we live with all the vulnerability and all the risk. And it's a season when we think about the way we live and how we include Christ in that. And most of us can answer, we may not include Jesus quite enough. So it's a time of drawing close and of being glad for what Christ has done for us and who we are as God's children and what there is yet out there ahead of us. Not just in heaven later, but for the rest of our lives here now. So I commend that to you and invite you as you come and commune this morning to begin this holy season of Lent with a look inward and with the expectation that God will bless you and that God will step close and walk with you in all the places that you and I have to go.